This is the story of how a dog almost caused another large-scale war in Europe and potentially might have kicked off World War II a lot sooner. The Balkans, where history isn't written, but detonated. This was especially true during World War I, when Bulgaria and Greece found themselves on opposite sides of a global meat grinder that was carving up alliances and feeding on imperial dreams. On the streets of Sofia and Athens, people were just trying to make it through another day. But in the war rooms, decisions were being made that would ripple across the region for decades. Bulgaria, ever the ambitious underdog in the Balkans, threw its lot in with the Central Powers, Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire. Why? Well, they had scores to settle, particularly with Serbia. And the Central Powers were more than happy to let Bulgaria vent some old Balkan rivalries in exchange for military support. The Ottoman Empire, a fading ghost of its former self, but still looming large enough to draw in allies. Germany, ruthlessly efficient and eager for Bulgaria's help to open up another front in the Balkans. At first, things looked promising. Bulgaria joined the war in 1915, hoping to expand its borders and restore the territorial glory it had lost after the Second Balkan War of 1913. There was this little thing called Macedonia, a volatile region claimed by just about every Balkan nation with a flag and an army, and Bulgaria wanted a piece of it. But the spoils of war often prove bitter, and by the time the dust settled in 1918, Bulgaria had rolled the dice and lost. Bulgaria's fortunes crumbled as the Central Powers capitulated. The Treaty of Neuilly-sur-Seine, I butchered that completely, in 1919 was like a slap in the face. Bulgaria lost territory again and had to pay hefty reparations. A nation that had entered the war with dreams of expanding its influence was now licking its wounds, humiliated and economically drained. And worst of all, their neighbors, like Greece, were getting stronger, making the post-war tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Now, Greece had its own dilemma during the Great War, with King Constantine I cozying up to the Central Powers thanks in part to his marriage to the Kaiser's sister, and Prime Minister Eleftherios Venizelos practically waving the Allied flag. The country was tearing itself apart from the inside. For a while, Greece played hard to get. Neutrality was their game, but by 1917, with the Allies basically forcing them into the war, they finally took a side. When Greece officially joined the Allied powers, it wasn't out of a sheer conviction, but more of a reluctant acceptance that their future lay with Britain, France, and the rest of the winning team. And in the post-war order, Greece didn't come out empty-handed. In fact, they walked away with a respectable amount of territory from the disintegrating Ottoman Empire, and suddenly, Greece was feeling like it was on the upswing. Their aspirations stretched as far as Asia Minor, and they were eager to play a dominant role in the new Balkan landscape. By the time World War I ended, the political map of the Balkans was a jigsaw puzzle of broken empires, seething nationalists, and grudges so deep that even time wouldn't heal them. Greece, now a close ally of the Western powers, felt emboldened. They had emerged victorious, and their ambitions were clear: expand their territory and influence across the region. Bulgaria, however, had been left in the cold. Economically weakened, politically humiliated, and bitterly resentful, the country was nursing a growing grudge. And here comes the fun part. Both nations were eyeing the same pieces of land. Greece had the support of the Allied powers, and Bulgaria, well, they had an axe to grind, and a growing sense of nationalism bubbling beneath the surface. The post-war treaties had redrawn borders, but they hadn't redrawn feelings. Macedonia, the perpetual troublemaker in the Balkan geopolitics, remained a source of conflict. Greece controlled the bulk of it, but Bulgaria still laid claim to what they saw as rightfully theirs. Tension simmered, but for a while both nations kept their powder dry, with neither daring to make the first move. At least that was until the barking of some dogs. It was a day like any other on the Greek-Bulgarian border, a line drawn in the dust by treaties that no one in the Balkans ever seemed to respect. On the outskirts of Petrich, a small, seemingly insignificant town tucked in the Bulgarian southwestern border, the tension between Greece and Bulgaria was so thick you could almost smell it. Or maybe that was just the stale gunpowder and paranoia, who knows. Either way, it didn't take much to ignite this powder keg. And what better way to start an international incident than with man's best friend? Yes, a dog. One of those four-legged creatures that normally brings smiles to faces, belly rubs, and wagging tails, well, that would become the catalyst for a conflict that almost plunged the entire region into another war. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Here's what happened. October 19th, 1925. The sun is beating down on the mountains between Greece and Bulgaria. The air tense with old grudges and fresh anxieties. Border guards on both sides are stationed in their outposts, bored but alert. And then, out of nowhere, a stray dog, probably just looking for a decent meal or a place to nap. Well, it crosses the invisible but very deadly line that separates Greece from Bulgaria. Now, a Greek soldier had clearly become fond and cared about this dog, so he chased after it. One step across the border, right? That's no big deal. Well, wrong. He didn't just cross the border, he stepped into a geopolitical minefield. On the Bulgarian side, nerves were already frayed from years of post-war humiliation, and when a Greek soldier appears on their turf, it's seen as an invasion, not an innocent overstep of a country's borders. So cue gunfire. Shots are exchanged, and before anyone can shout, "It's just a dog," the Greek soldier lied dead on the Bulgarian soil. Of course, the Greeks don't take kindly to one of their own being gunned down. In a region where national pride is second only to the desire for revenge, this wasn't going to end with a few angry telegrams. What followed was the Balkan version of a bar fight. One insult too many, and suddenly everyone's swinging. Greece, already feeling superior with its post-World War I gains and close ties to the Western powers, decides it's time to teach Bulgaria a lesson. After all, they just shot one of their soldiers over a stray dog. That's grounds for war, right? Well, maybe, or maybe not quite, but it was certainly grounds for a swift military response. Greek forces mobilized. On October 22nd, Greek soldiers marched into Bulgaria. Guns ready, uniforms crisp, their goal, take the town of Petrich and show those Bulgarians who was boss. And honestly, why not? Petrich was just a small town mostly known for its vineyards and sleepy streets, not exactly a fortress. Surely, this would be a quick little show of force, Bulgaria backs down, and Greece walks away victorious. But Bulgaria wasn't in the mood to roll over. Though still licking their wounds from the Treaty of Ruthlessly and its painful consequences, I still can't pronounce that, Bulgaria's pride was on the line. Surely they were weakened economically and militarily, but they weren't about to let Greece, of all countries, waltz into their territory and plant a flag. The Bulgarians called for help from the League of Nations, hoping that diplomacy might stop the situation from spiraling completely out of control. As Greek forces advanced into Petrich, they were met with stiff resistance. Bulgarian troops dug in, and soon enough, what was supposed to be a quick and decisive retaliation turned into a pitched battle. Civilians in Petrich scattered, their homes suddenly caught in the crossfire. The Greek army shelled the town, while Bulgarian forces scrambled to protect their homes and livelihoods. For a brief moment, it looked like this border skirmish could turn into a full-scale war. While bullets flew and tensions escalated, the rest of the world watched in horrified fascination. In 1925, the Balkans were still very much a tinderbox, and the fear was that this small, absurd conflict might light a fire that would spread across Europe again. The League of Nations, the world's first attempt at a collective security body that worked about as well as a broken umbrella in a storm, well, it stepped in to mediate. And for once, they weren't going to wait for the bodies to pile up before they intervened. The League of Nations acted with uncharacteristic speed, sending a commission to investigate and demanding a ceasefire from both sides. It was like a teacher breaking up a fight between two schoolyard bullies, who both insisted the other started it. And to their credit, both Greece and Bulgaria agreed to step back, though not without some lingering resentment. The ceasefire went into effect, but the damage had already been done. Greek soldiers were dead, Bulgarian civilians had suffered, and both nations were furious with each other. The League of Nations ordered Greece to pay reparations to Bulgaria for the damage done to Petrich, £30,000, which, while not a fortune, certainly stung. The incident at Petrich, or the War of the Stray Dog, as we call it today, might sound laughable, almost like the plot of a kind of silly play, but it had the potential to ignite a much larger conflict. Had Greece pressed further into Bulgaria, or had Bulgaria retaliated with greater force, the region could have erupted into war once again. The scars of World War I were still fresh, and the alliances that had been forged in blood weren't entirely solid. But imagine what would have happened if the League of Nations didn't step in and properly mediate this conflict. This was a fuse that, if it were left to burn a little bit longer, could have turned the Balkans into a full-blown inferno, where the paw prints of a wandering dog might have ignited World War II about 14 years early. Greece's Prime Minister Theodoros Pengalos wasn't exactly the type to back down from a fight, especially not one that could make him look strong at home and abroad. So, let's say the ceasefire had been a little bit late, or maybe Pengalos decided to go all in and take more Bulgarian territory. What would that have looked like? For starters, a Greek invasion of Bulgaria wouldn't have stayed a local issue for very long. Greece might have taken Petrich, but Bulgarian resistance would have stiffened, and soon the Greek army would have found itself bogged down in a quagmire of mountainous terrain and a fierce local fighting force. And Bulgaria wasn't going to take this lying down. They were going to resist and potentially counterattack. But the real twist comes when you realize that neither Greece nor Bulgaria could fight a war alone. Greece, with its connections to the Allied powers, might have been able to call in some favors from Britain or France. They'd already fought together in World War I, and Greece had cozied up to the West quite well since then. Imagine British ships cruising into the Aegean, French troops landing in Thessaloniki. What started as a border skirmish could have spiraled into something much bigger, because nothing says global conflict like a few old alliances rearing their heads. And if there is no ceasefire and the Allies don't join in, maybe the Bulgarians take Petrich back with a vengeance, but what if they don't stop there? The lines are already crossed, the blood has already been spilled, so Bulgaria could have pushed deeper into Greek territory, reclaiming lost lands, or at least trying to reclaim lost lands. Suddenly, Macedonia is back on the table again. Remember that volatile piece of land that both Greece and Bulgaria were eyeing like kids fighting over a toy? Well, yeah, that becomes the heart of the conflict. Bulgaria could have reignited old claims to the region, turning what was once a localized conflict into a messy land grab. And of course, the Bulgarians might not have been fighting alone either. Just as Greece had ties to the Allies, Bulgaria had been cozy with the Central Powers during World War I. While Germany and Austria-Hungary were licking their wounds after the war, there was still the Ottoman Empire, which had its own reasons to want a piece of the action. Who knows, maybe some of the old alliances reawaken, and suddenly the Balkans isn't just a regional conflict anymore, but it's a magnet for international chaos, just like what started World War I. Imagine that, Greece and Bulgaria embroiled in a full-scale war, pulling in their allies from World War I. Britain and France might have hesitated at first, but could they really afford to ignore their Greek ally? Especially with the strategic importance of the Mediterranean hanging in the balance? The West wouldn't want to lose its foothold in the region, and Greece's location made it a key player. Meanwhile, Bulgaria had lost territory and might have found itself courting new allies, perhaps even reaching out to the Soviet Union. Because hey, why not toss another wildcard into the mix? And if the conflict had escalated, the world could have seen itself catapulted into another world war once again, starting World War II in 1925 over a stray dog. Now, World War II might have kicked off in 2025, and instead of waiting for Hitler to rise to power, we might have seen a very different set of actors plunge the world into darkness, all because of a skirmish over a town most of the world couldn't even find on a map. Now, what was the likelihood of this happening? I mean, I would say it's pretty small, but it definitely was not zero. And in the end, cooler heads miraculously prevailed. The League of Nations put out the fire before it spread, and Greece and Bulgaria went back to glaring at each other across their contentious borders. But for a moment, just a brief, barking, mad moment, the world was closer than it realized to reliving the horrors of a global war, all thanks to one stray dog's ill-timed jaunt into no man's land. Thanks for watching.